Welcome to a new deep dive. Today we're exploring the ideas of Alfred Adler, a really significant psychologist from Vienna.
Yeah, definitely influential, a contemporary of Freud and Jung, but he really carved his own path in the early 20th century.
With individual psychology, right?
Exactly. And his insights, they still feel incredibly relevant for understanding why we do what we do.
So what were some of those core principles? You mentioned holism.
Right, looking at the individual as a complete, unified whole, not just parts. And he was big on equality, especially in families, advocating for more democratic ways with kids.
And of course, the famous inferiority complex.
That's one many people know, yeah. But there's quite a bit more to it.
Okay, let's unpack that. What else should we know about his key concepts?
Well, he had some fascinating ideas about birth order, how that shapes us.
Ah, yes. The oldest, middle, youngest sort of thing.
Kind of. And the impact of neglect, but also, interestingly, being pampered too much.
Spoiled, you mean?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah. And this idea of social interest, our sort of innate ability to connect and contribute, he saw that as crucial for psychological health.
Social interest.
Yeah.
Like community feeling.
Exactly. And he believed that very early on, we develop a kind of guiding narrative, a lifestyle, that shapes how we see things later.
Wow, okay. And you mentioned his focus on gender, too.
Yes, he was quite ahead of his time, looking at feminism and the dynamics between men and women in society.
Fascinating. So for this deep dive, we're focusing on his work, understanding human nature. What's our main goal here? What should you, the listener, take away?
Well, the idea is to explore some core concepts from that work, really looking at how personality starts forming in those very early years.
And what drives our actions?
Right, we'll dig into social interest, that feeling of inferiority, our need to feel significant. It throws up some, surprising angles on everyday interactions.
All right, let's jump in. When Adler talks about the psyche, what does he actually mean?
Okay, so from his angle, the psyche isn't just random thoughts. It's seen as conscious and, this is key, purposeful.
Purposeful. How so?
Every psychological tendency, every little expression is moving towards some kind of goal. It's directed.
And how early does this start? It always seems to come back to childhood, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The very, very earliest experiences are critical. Those first impressions, the attitudes we form then, they lay the groundwork.
For pretty much everything later.
A lot of it, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't really understand isolated behaviors without seeing them as part of that whole picture, starting way back. It's all connected.
So if we're trying to understand an adult's behavior, maybe something that seems confusing?
You really have to look back. Those fundamental patterns get set early.
Yeah.
Understanding that is, well, it's key to understanding deeper psychological issues.
Makes sense. That's why childhood is such a focus.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift to social interest again. How important are our connections with others in this view?
Fundamentally important. Humans have this basic need for community, for communal life. That feeling of connection gives us security, helps us adapt. We're social beings, really.
And social interest itself. Why is it considered so vital?
It's seen as absolutely essential for well-being, both ours and society's. Having concerned, caring relationships, that's crucial for tackling life's problems.
So it's a sign of mental health.
A real hallmark of it, yes.
Hmm.
Understanding and actively contributing to the common good.
How does a child even start developing that? From infancy?
Right, from the start, yeah. A baby naturally seeks affection, their attention, their love. It's directed outwards, towards caregivers mostly.
That's different from some views, isn't it? That focus more on self-centeredness initially.
It is. Adler saw the child's natural tendency as being towards connection.
What happens if a child faces obstacles early on? How does that shape them?
Well, kids naturally try to compensate for weaknesses they perceive, real or imagined.
Their interpretation matters most.
Hugely. If a child sees their environment as hostile, even if it isn't fully, that perception shapes their personality. They might start acting as if the world is dangerous.
And later difficulties reinforce that.
Exactly. It can become a pattern.
You also mentioned organ inferiority. What's that about?
That refers to being born with some kind of physical disadvantage.
Like a disability.
Could be, yeah. And children facing those challenges often react differently to their environment.
How so?
Well, say a child has a physical limitation. They might develop this really strong drive to excel in other ways, maybe become super determined or even more assertive to kind of make up for it.
Compensating.
Right. It highlights that striving to overcome perceived limits, to find mastery.
What about parental tenderness? Or the lack of it?
Oh, that's significant.
Yeah.
If a child doesn't experience love, or if showing tenderness is discouraged in the family,
What happens then?
they can develop this sort of escapist attitude towards relationships. They might struggle to recognize real affection or know how to give it because that instinct wasn't nurtured,
They might see it as weakness.
possibly. Or just something confusing, something to avoid. It can really hinder forming healthy relationships later.
Okay, let's move to this idea that all behavior is striving for a goal. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, this is really foundational. Every action, every tendency, it's directed towards some endpoint.
And it's shaped by where we start from, too.
Exactly. How we see our current situation influences that striving. It's a constant movement.
And this links to the feeling of inferiority. Is that universal?
Adler believes so, yes. All children feel small, dependent, less capable than adults.
Which sounds negative, but
But it isn't necessarily. That feeling becomes the main driver for development. It fuels the striving to grow, learn, overcome inadequacy. It's natural.
so the goal isn't perfection, getting rid of the feeling entirely.
No, not at all. It's about personal effectiveness, moving forward, having the courage to be imperfect.
I like that phrase.
It's good, isn't it? Life is that striving, that movement from a minus to a plus, as he put it. Perfection is static. Life is about growth.
You said character types start forming early, too. How does that begin?
Even as toddlers, kids develop patterns to get recognition, to feel like they belong. Some might try through asserting power, being dominant. Others might learn to use their weaknesses, to get attention or sympathy. You can see these tendencies emerge.
And the environment plays a big role here.
Absolutely massive. A child's behavior usually mirrors their environment. If they see the world as hostile, they'll likely act that way. Understanding that connection is key to understanding character.
What about kids who are spoiled or whose parents remove every obstacle?
That can actually backfire. Being spoiled means you don't learn responsibility or how to cope with challenges.
Makes sense.
And if every difficulty is removed, you're just not prepared for real life, for setbacks.
Yeah.
You might expect constant care and really struggle when you don't get it.
Okay, let's circle back to the individual as a social being. How does seeing someone in their social context change our understanding?
It changes everything, really. You can't grasp personality in a vacuum. You have to see them in their environment, their place, their attitude towards work, friends, daily stuff.
Even from infancy.
Yeah, even just months after birth. Infants show behavior patterns rooted in their social connections. Their inner world and outer relationships become tightly linked.
Let's talk about dreams. They're always a big topic in psychology. Adler's view.
Dreams, both daydreams and night dreams, are seen as part of that goal-oriented psyche too.
Wow.
They're like attempts to map things out, plan, guide life towards security, towards overcoming problems. They give insights into our emotional life, our striving for significance or power.
You mentioned daydreams are easier to understand than night dreams.
Generally, yes. Daydreams often reflect conscious wishes, plans. Night dreams tend to be more symbolic, less direct.
But still meaningful.
Still meaningful, definitely. They're expressions of our underlying patterns and strivings, even if they're harder to decode immediately.
Can you give an example? How might a dream show these tendencies?
Sure. Say someone dreams they forgot a really important meeting, and they feel terrible guilt in the dream.
Okay.
Even if they're normally super organized, the dream might reveal an underlying anxiety about social approval, maybe a fear of failure or pressure to be perfect socially.
Interesting. Now, there was that detailed dream analysis mention about a boat trip. What did that reveal?
Ah, yes, that was a rich one. The patient's history, childhood illness, being overprotected, social isolation, feeling inadequate intellectually, it all came out symbolically.
In the dream images.
Exactly. The sinking ship, avoiding work in the dream, the dangerous cliff, the unwelcome greeting. It all pointed to his deep feelings of inferiority.
And he's striving.
And his intense, probably unconscious, striving for power and dominance to compensate for feeling helpless and isolated early on. The dream sort of encapsulated his whole life struggle.
What about intelligence? How much should we focus on that when trying to understand someone?
Well, intelligence matters, obviously. But this view suggests looking beyond just what people say or their IQ score.
So what should we look at?
How they process things, how they express themselves, sure, that gives clues. But it's more about understanding their underlying motivations, their goals, the direction they're moving in life.
Okay. The material also went into male dominance and the historical idea of female inferiority. What's the perspective there?
It's quite critical. It examines how culture historically emphasized male power, leading to a division of labor favoring men.
Which creates tension.
Often, yes. a striving for male dominance and dissatisfaction among women, and many societal structures, laws, traditions, customs have unfortunately reflected and reinforced this.
Even affecting kids' understanding of gender roles.
From a very young age, yeah.
And the justification was often that women were just inherently less capable.
Right. And this perspective strongly challenges that. It argues prejudice itself undermines women's self-belief, limits their confidence and potential.
So if women are told they're less capable,
It's not surprising they might appear that way. It mentions studies, like Girls and Families, where the mother was the main earner, showing that without those prejudices, abilities develop more freely.
suggesting it's societal limits, not inherent traits.
Exactly. Lack of opportunities, societal pressure.
So if women feel dissatisfied with the traditional female role due to these pressures, how might that show up?
Various ways. Because society often offers limited models. The ideal man or woman rejecting the limits of the feminine role might look like masculine behavior.
Not because they're inherently masculine.
Not necessarily. More a reaction against constraints when there aren't other readily available models. It highlights the difficulties girls face developing psychologically without true equality.
Did it mention different types of women in relation to parenting?
It did outline a few patterns, yeah.
Yeah.
Some might adopt a stricter, more masculine parenting style focused on control.
Okay.
Others, maybe internalizing inferiority messages, might become overly anxious or tender as mothers.
And a third type.
Some might mask a desire for power by feigning helplessness, maybe manipulating things subtly. It just shows how complex these dynamics are within families. The example of the woman with the domineering mother really illustrated that.
What about the dangerous age concept around menopause?
Right. The physical changes women experience then, in a prejudiced society, can be wrongly seen as a loss of value.
Leading them to try harder to prove their worth?
It can, yes.
Yeah.
And our culture often values people based on current performance, which makes aging tough, especially for women. The text stresses that a woman's worth doesn't end with menopause.
She deserves respect beyond that stage.
Absolutely. Respect and honor throughout life.
This ongoing tension between the sexes sounds so damaging. What's the path to reconciliation here?
The argument is that these problems stem from societal prejudice, the flawed ideas of male superiority and female inferiority.
Which poisons relationships.
Completely. It hinders real happiness. The key, this view suggests, is genuine companionship, friendship, true equilibrium. Subordination is as unbearable here as between nations.
Briefly, what about birth order? Any quick insights?
Well, eldest kids might strive to keep their initial top spot and struggle when siblings arrive.
Trying to regain privilege.
Sort of. Second children are often seen as being in a constant race, spurred on by the older sibling.
And only children.
They have that unique position, sole focus of attention, which can sometimes lead to dependence or unrealistic expectations about life.
We've talked a lot about the drive for power. How do we counter the negative sides of that?
Developing strong social feeling is presented as the answer.
That community connection again.
Right. If individuals develop that genuine concern for others early on, they're less likely to be harmed by obstacles or pursue power destructively.
But our culture doesn't always foster that.
Unfortunately, the text notes it often lacks opportunities for social feeling to fully develop.
Let's talk character traits. Lazy, optimistic, pessimistic. Are these things we're born with?
No, not according to this view. They're seen as expressions of how we try to adapt to the world. They develop over time.
So even laziness could be what?
Maybe a way of keeping a sense of significance in a situation, perhaps by avoiding potential failure. Traits are secondary, shaped by underlying goals.
So this goal of superiority we keep mentioning, how does social feeling interact with that?
The striving for superiority is often there, maybe hidden. Social feeling acts as a crucial counterbalance, tempering it.
So they're not necessarily opposed.
They interact. More mutual understanding could lessen that veiled struggle for superiority. Social feeling itself is influenced by our inferiority feelings and the resulting striving. But community spirit is the ultimate benchmark for human values. We depend on it.
Can you give examples of common traits and their motivations from this perspective?
Sure. Optimism might develop fairly smoothly, leading someone to face challenges with courage.
Believing they can cope.
Right. Pessimism might stem from early hardships, leading to a belief life is just hard, needing constant support.
What about being defensive?
That might be compensating for insecurity with anxiety. Maybe after past attempts at assertion didn't go well. A critical attitude could come from losing faith in others, using criticism as a defense.
It's all about adaptation.
Exactly. Adaptive strategies based on underlying goals and feelings.
Lastly, vanity. It's presented as pretty destructive.
Yes, common, but often hidden, sometimes even masked as modesty. Excessive vanity is dangerous because it detaches you from reality.
How?
It distorts relationships, makes you neglect social obligations, inflates self-importance. It hinders growth. The vinegar jar fairy tale was used as an example of how it leads to self-destruction.
Other ways it shows up.
Seeking attention through illness, maybe, abusing empathy, false amiability to manipulate. Even bad habits can be linked, used defensively to avoid facing inadequacies.
Okay, so summing up, Adler's perspective really highlights what?
It really underscores that profound impact of early childhood, the absolute necessity of social feeling, that connection to others, and this universal striving to matter, to overcome feeling inferior.
And these dynamics shape everything.
They shape our character, our interactions, all the time, often unconsciously.
And understanding this helps us.
Helps us understand ourselves and others with more insight, more compassion, moving beyond just surface judgments.
Engaging more meaningfully.
Exactly.
That's a powerful takeaway. So for you, the listener, maybe think about those earliest memories, those first feelings of inadequacy you recall. How might they still be subtly guiding your goals, your actions today?
Yeah, and what steps could you maybe take to consciously build more social interest, more connection, and importantly, to approach life's imperfections with a bit more courage?
Something to reflect on. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.